I'd like to welcome you all to this first lecture in week 11 of ICS 104. Any questions before we proceed? Let me first make a small announcement regarding the quiz, and I decided to postpone it until next week. I think some of you have midterm exams, and also I didn't make the what you call the survey, you know, to see which day or which time and day is better for this week. And so you didn't have any idea of, you know, what to study in the weekend, if some of you plan to do so regarding the material. So I decided, خلاص, since this week is the last week of the midterms, inshallah we will have the quiz next week, of course, at the same time. And I hope, you know, there are no more midterms next week. Huh? Okay.
اتوقع اخر كويز اليوم الاثنين او اخر مد عفوا.
Yes.
دكتور.
نعم.
The quiz will be most likely which from where to where?
والله شوف احنا الميد تيرم our last quiz covered the material of the midterm, صح ولا even more?
Even more until before I think the random. Look, the random.
Before the random. But it didn't cover loops, right?
It covered loop.
It did. It was until the loop.
It was until the loops?
If I'm not mistaken.
طيب هو anyways loops will be with you يعني don't worry. I cannot ask about lists without loops, صح? we agreed that it's gonna be like this. Okay. And basically what I plan to do is I plan to have it what you call يعني for the next 2 weeks I will make the material shorter, and we will have, you know, 2 quizzes in consecutive weeks. Okay. If loops were there, so maybe I will say let's assume, for example, functions and lists. I think is maybe good enough. Functions and lists in one quiz, and then we will have files and exceptions for the other one. Oh, it's up to you. Yani, which one would you like? Do you want to have the list, tuples, and dictionaries with files and exceptions? Because I think you need to study files and exceptions more. Huh?
I agree.
Yeah. So basically next week we will have the quiz on functions and lists, tuples, and dictionaries. Especially, by the way, good news come in the same time. The next homework is going to be posted, inshallah, 10 a.m. today. Okay, it's very nice. It is basically on loops and functions, and it's due, I think, maybe next Saturday. It's not that hard. It's not that long, but I'm pretty sure, inshallah, if you solve it, it will be, you know, preparation for the quiz. Okay, it will be preparation. So inshallah, you will not have a problem. Okay, Shabab. Next week it will be on functions, lists, tuples, and dictionaries, and the week after it will be on files and exceptions. واضح? Any other questions?
And Doctor,
Now,
did we take?
the quizzes, ما هو give me time لأنه I was busy والله grading the midterm. I haven't even finished looking at some of the concerns that you had, you know, on your own midterm. I had another midterm to grade. But inshallah by this weekend I should finish all. Okay, I should finish all the previous quizzes, the grading of the previous quizzes. By the way, we might try to use the GradeScope. I haven't tested it yet, but we will see whether we are going to use the blackboard for the quizzes or because Gradescope has very nice features. You know, if you want to, if you, regrade requests are, you know, handled very nicely in Gradescope. We'll see, inshallah. We'll see. تفضل.
Doctor, how many courses did we take until now?
We took three, صح?
Yeah, 3 and there are 2.
And we'll try to take more, 2 more.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Okay. Right. Okay, Shabab. So basically, this is where we stopped the other day on the general syntax for handling exceptions. So as we said, it's basically a try except statement, right? So try, the block of the try will contain the statements that you fear might raise some exceptions, and then you will start listing the exceptions one at a time. So you can say except and then exception type, and then you know how to handle this exception in its block. If you want to do something with the exception object that was raised, you can actually do it like as variable name, right? So variable name will contain the exception object, okay? Will contain the exception object, just like here, for example, accept exception as except object, and then you can do whatever you want with that exception object. Like, for example, you can print the message associated with the exception object raised using the str and then except object, okay? So, one thing you have to remember, by the way, is that when you list the exceptions, list them from the most specific to the most general, right? List them from the most specific to the most general, because if you do otherwise, if you catch, you know, a general, you will never reach the more specific, huh? You will never reach the more specific. This is just exactly the same as when we learned in the Aleph, you know, statement. In the Aleph statement, usually we put the most specific conditions first, huh? And then we go, you know, wider, or we go, you know, more general in the subsequent Aleph statements. Okay, so this is kind of the general syntax for the exceptions. The last thing that we would like to do before we close this subject is the finally clause. Now, occasionally, you need to take some action whether or not an exception is raised. Whether or not an exception is raised. Sometimes you need to take some action. The finally construct is used to handle this situation. Okay? And for example, we mentioned earlier, what could happen if I'm writing to a file and I don't close the file? Do you remember?
It may not save all the data.
It may not save all the data, صح? It may not save all the data. So it's important to close an output file regardless whether an exception was raised or not. Right? If you have any file which was open for output, if there is an exception raised, you need to make sure that all these files are closed. How do you do that? Well, you can do that using the finally clause, right? So, for example, here, let's assume that we would like to run some code, and we want to write a hello world into a file, right? We want to write hello world into a file, and then after that, assume that I had this statement, value equal 1 over 0. Okay, value equal 1 over 0. Now, if you look at the code, it looks great, صح? Everything should work fine. ولا لا? I have outfile.close, صح? I have outfile.close. So if I try to run this, enter the file name, well, let's assume that I enter, wasfi.txt, right? And then it gave error division by 0. So let's go to wasfi.text. Where is wasfi? Well, this is wasfi.text. Now, if I try to open it, there is nothing. Hello world was not printed. Why? Any idea, Shabab? Why was hello world not printed?
Because the line containing outfile.close was not executed.
Line 6 was never executed, ya Shabab. Line 6 was never executed. When line 5 was executed, an exception was raised and execution went to the to line 7. And we had, you know, the division by 0 error that was shown by the exception object exception. Okay, so in order to handle this better, well, we need a finally clause to make sure that, you know, outfile, you know, whatever happens inside the try block, it will always, you know, close that file. Okay, so if I change now the code, now I don't need to put, you know, outfile.close in two places, in the try block and in the finally. خلاص, once I, you know, execute the try block, if everything went fine, it will basically go to finally by default. It will go to finally. So whether an exception was raised or an exception was not raised, it will go and it will execute the block of the finally. It will go and it will execute the block of the finally. So if I run this code now, okay, and again I put wasfi.txt, and I see here, it looks like, you know, exactly the same thing, you know, error division by 0. But now when I bring the file, you can see that, you know, at least whatever I have done in that file was not lost. Whatever I have done in that file was not lost. واضح يا شباب؟
دكتور.
نعم.
Can't we just delete the tab, the spaces before the out file that close?
The spaces before. No, this is in the body of the finally. The finally has a block. It's not only, you know, yani, for example, if you had 10 files open, you can list 10 statements under the finally. It's a block. واضح؟
واضح.
تمام؟ Okay.
Victor?
نعم.
If we indented the finally, so it will be in the except level. Okay.
Hey, it is in the except level.
I mean indented, so it will be within the except.
I think it will give an error. لأنه it should be part of the same try block. It should follow the same try. If I indented like here, like this, then I should have some try block here, صح? Invalid syntax على طول.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so this is basically the syntax of the finally clause. So you have try, you have whatever, you have all the excepts, and then you can have a finally. So this code is always executed if an exception is raised in the try block, or if the exception is not raised in the try block. It will always, you know, after it finishes the try block, it will go and it will execute the finally, whether an exception was raised or not. Okay, whether an exception was raised or not. Okay, طيب. So the finally block is always executed after leaving the try statement. In case if some exception was not handled by the except block, it is raised after execution of the finally block. Okay, so if an exception was not handled by the try, it will first execute the finally block, and then it will raise that exception. Okay, and then it will raise that exception. So with this, we are basically done with this chapter. and we are ready now to move to the next chapter, which is on objects and classes, طيب. So waiting until this comes up.
دكتور,
نعم.
when are we taking C?
Right after this week. This week, inshallah, we'll try to finish the classes, and next week we will start C.
Okay.
Right. So, reading assignment, chapter 9, sections 1 through 7. What do we expect to know after going over this chapter? Well, basically to understand the concepts of classes, objects, and encapsulation, to implement instance variables, methods, and constructors, and to be able to design, implement, and test our own classes. Okay. So let's first give kind of an introduction to object-oriented programming. You have learned how to structure your programs by decomposing tasks into functions. In fact, you will do it when you do the next homework, the upcoming homework. Okay. So basically, the best thing is to break tasks into subtasks, and then you write reusable methods to handle tasks, right? Or reusable functions, to handle those tasks. Now, why are we going to study objects and classes? Well, the need for object-oriented programming is raised by two important needs or requirements. The first one is basically to build larger and more complex programs. To build larger and more complex programs, objects and classes make that easily, doable and manageable. Okay, easily doable and manageable. It's also used to model objects we use in the world, so it is kind of intuitive. It is kind of intuitive. For example, a class describes objects with the same behavior. For example, a car class describes all passenger vehicles that have a certain capacity and shape. A car class describes all passenger vehicles that have a certain capacity and shape. So when you define that class, if there are special, cars, you can actually take some of its properties, from the general class. Now, we will not go into that. This is part of inheritance and what have you. We will not go into that. But this is basically the idea behind, object orientation, is that, we have classes, and, those classes, can be general classes, and then you can go to more specific classes. So now, as we know, we have learned how to structure our programs by decomposing tasks into functions. Now, experience shows that it does not go far enough. When you do that, when you divide your programs into functions, this is not enough, to handle like big or complex programs. It is difficult to understand and update a program that consists of a large collection of functions. That's why you need to have some organization, right? You need to have some organization of your program, and object orientation, does that. So to overcome this problem, computer scientists invented object-oriented programming, a programming style in which tasks are solved by collaborating objects. Each object has its own set of data, together with a set of methods that act upon the data. So as an object, you have data, and you have methods associated with it. Objects or other objects are not allowed to interact with this object except through those methods. Okay, except through those. So these methods are, maintained locally by the object. No other object, can go and mess with, that data. So, for example, you have already experienced this programming style, when you used strings, lists, and file objects. each of these objects has a set of methods. You know, remember the set of methods that we learned regarding like strings, for example? You know, there were methods that only apply to strings, right? Like, for example, is upper, is lower, upper, lower. All these methods are methods associated with the string object. For example, you can use the insert or remove methods, you know, to operate on list objects. So the list objects have their own, you know, insert or remove, right? And similarly, we have seen also inserts and removed in, well, maybe not insert, but remove. We also saw remove in dictionaries, صح ولا لا? Right? So depending on the depending on the object, you can, you know, define its own methods, right? The methods that are only specific to this type of object. Right. So a class describes a set of objects with the same behavior. A class describes a set of objects with the same behavior. For example, you know, the str class describes the behavior of all strings. So all methods that are defined on strings, you will find it in the str class. Okay, you will find it in the str class. So this class specifies how a string stores its characters, which methods can be used with the strings, and how the methods are implemented. Okay, so these are the three things that are basically specified using a class. So how a string stores its characters, which methods can be used, and how the methods are implemented, or what are the implementation details. For example, when you have a string object, you can invoke the upper method. When you have a string object, you can invoke the upper method. So if this is the string object, you can apply dot upper on the on this string. Now, what will happen, you know, as a result of this call? Well, who can tell me?
What is it?
What will happen as a result of this statement? If I execute this statement, what will happen?
Every letter will be
capitalize it.
capitalized.
Every letter capitalized in the same string, in this string, صح?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, it's kind of not yes, because we said that we cannot change strings, صح? We cannot change contents of strings. A new string will be created where each, you know, letter in that string is capitalized, صح ولا لا? Where each letter in this string is capitalized.
Doctor, is Python can differentiate between the word and comma?
Well, the upper method does. So when you apply the upper method on a string that has a comma, it will not do anything to the comma. It will not do anything to the space. Okay, because upper only operate on small letters, صح ولا لا? I mean, this is where a change will happen. But if it's already capital letter, or if it's not a letter, nothing will happen. Okay. So in contrast, the list class describes the behavior of objects that can be used to store collection of values. This class has a different set of methods, right? For example, the following call would be illegal if I try and run this. Method, it will give me an attribute error. It says list object has no attribute upper. There is nothing, you know, there is no method called upper defined for lists. There is no method upper defined for lists, right? So the class list has its own methods. The class list has its own method. For example, the pop. You know, the pop is a legal call. You know, if I take this if I take this and if I run this, okay, so of course if I run this, I did not print anything, but it actually printed, you know, by the way, what did it print? خلينا نشوفكم.
The deleted item.
The deleted item. It printed the deleted item, which is Word, right? So after this call, the list should contain only hello, صح? The list should contain
Yes.
only hello. So if I run this code here, you will see that, you know, the list contains only hello. Okay, the list contains only hello. واضح يا شباب? Any questions so far? طيب. Okay, is the method call hello world.print legal? Why or why not? ايش رايكم؟
No.
Why not?
لأن الميثود هذا مش موجود في الكلاس.
Print is not part of the class string. Print is not part. In fact, print is a function that accepts arguments. Right? Print is a function that accepts arguments. There is no method called the print that is defined for the string class. There is no method called the print defined for the string class. Yes.
يمدينا نضيف للstring class يعني نخليها it's possible to do the print method like this.
Well, maybe you can. Well, I don't know if you can access because you know strings are standard Python data type, صح? Can you update a standard Python data type? I know that if you define your own user-defined data type, you can do whatever with it. You can define print, you can define whatever function that is used outside, you can actually define it in the user-defined type. But for a standard, you know, Python library, I doubt it. And even if it is possible, I wouldn't recommend doing it. Okay.
So
okay.
making it complex يعني.
Yeah, يعني since it is standard, when you try to introduce something like you know, for example, a print, you know, to the string, and then it will work, then you know you will have different behaviors in different programs. يعني a Python programmer, when he sees this, he will be, you know, surprised, صح?
معك حق. صح.
Okay. طيب. Okay. Now let's move on to the concept of public interfaces. Okay, so the set of all methods provided by a class, together with a description of their behavior, is called the public interface of the class. Okay, is called the public interface of the class. When you work with an object of a class, you do not know how the object stores its data or how the methods are implemented. Do you need to know that? The answer is no. Do you know, for example, you know, how the str object organizes a character sequence or how a list stores its elements? Do we know this type of detail
It is hidden.
about? Huh?
It is hidden.
It is hidden from us. صح? And does it hurt us not to know how a list is stored or how a string is stored or how the upper method, you know, works? Does it hurt us?
I think for an introductory course it doesn't.
Oh, how? What about an advanced course?
I asked, for example, before if we can generate more variables by doing some method. Maybe if we dig into the details of the language itself, we can find a way. But for a beginner course, we cannot.
Yeah, but now I'm not talking about that. See, creating more variables. We will see how we can create more well, I don't know if we will see, how to create more variables during the runtime of the program. But the question is, knowing the details of methods that you will only use them. Okay, you will not have to modify them. You will only use them. Knowing their details will not add anything to you, unless you are an experienced programmer and you want to introduce a new type, and you would like to see the different ways of implementations that will make it maybe better or faster or any other good property that we can have. But other than that, if we are just using those methods, I really don't need to know their details. Okay, if we are just using these types, I really don't need to know how these types are stored. Okay, as long as I'm just using them, right? So all what we need to know is basically the public interface. Now, what is the public interface? Well, which methods you can apply and what these methods do. That's it. In software engineering, this is called the specification. Okay, the specification. So what methods can you use with a certain type, and what do these methods exactly do? And what do these methods exactly do? I don't need to know how they are done. Okay, I don't need to know how they are done. I just need to know what they are and what do they do.
Doctor?
What they are and what do they do. That's the specification. Further.
Do importing libraries is included in the public interface or not?
Including importing libraries?
Yes.
Well, when you import a library, then you are importing the public interface because you are going to use it, huh? When you import the math, will you be able to use the constant pi or cosine or sine or all these functions? Will you be able to use them without importing the math library?
No.
You cannot. Huh? So when you import the library, you basically have access to the public interface of that library. Huh? That's the public interface. Okay, that's the public interface. So the process of providing a public interface while hiding the implementation details is called encapsulation. And this is one of the very important, concepts in object orientation. Encapsulation, right? So if you provide a public interface while hiding the implementation, why do we call it encapsulation? Well, basically, you only know the method, what parameters you have, right? You only know that, but the implementation is hidden from you. You don't care about the implementation. Okay, you don't care about the implementation. This is called encapsulation. So if you work on a program that is being developed over a long period of time, it is common for implementation details to change, usually to make objects more efficient or more capable. And this is the nice thing about encapsulation. Now, what does that mean? Well, let me give a hypothetical example. Okay, let me give a hypothetical example. Assume that you had a class, and in the details of the class, you used, for example, lists as an implementation, right? You used lists as an implementation. Later on, you decided that lists are not good enough, and you might need to use a dictionary for the implementation. Right. Now, what does encapsulation do? Well, as far as the public interface is concerned, it will not change. As far as the public interface, it will not change, right? And this is if you have written the public interface, correctly, or if you designed your public interface properly. If you designed your public interface properly, you don't have to change the implementation. You don't have to change it. You use exactly the same public interface, but then you can do whatever in the in the inside or in the implementation of the methods inside the public interface, right? Another example is, for example, assume that a better, a more efficient algorithm was used to do a certain method. A more efficient algorithm, a much faster algorithm was, invented, to carry out a certain method. This does not affect the public interface of the method. The method still, is applied on objects of this class and still takes these arguments. But as far as how it carries out its tasks, a new implementation, was found, and therefore, it was incorporated. From the user, I don't care what happens what we call behind the scenes, right? I don't care what happens behind the scenes as long as it, does what I want. So that's why in the public interface, we really need to know, what it does and what it can do and exactly what does it do and exactly what does it do. So when the implementation is hidden, the improvements do not affect the programmers who use the object, because the public interface should be untouched. The public interface should stay untouched. Okay, Shabab? طيب. So let's talk about, implementing a simple class. Let's consider a tally counter. Okay, let's consider a tally counter. Basically, a class that models a mechanical device that is used to count people. A class that models a mechanical device that is used to count people. So, for example, to find out how many people board a bus. Sometimes that tally counter might not, well, even sometimes when you go into one of those big, hypermarkets, sometimes you need to go through, something that rotates, صح? You push it and it will let you in. While doing that, by the way, it's counting. صح ولا لا? When it moves, it counts. So it's something similar to that, right? It is something similar to that. So whenever the operator pushes a button, the counter value advances by 1. If you push a button, the counter value advances by 1. The counter has a display to show the current value. The counter has a display to show the current value. So you have a button. Whenever you press it, 1 is added, right? And the display will show the current. In fact, the button is actually here. Maybe this is the button, right? This is the button. So whenever you push that button, this becomes 124. If you push it again, this becomes 125, and so on and so forth. Okay? Right. So what operations can you identify are needed in this class? This is basically, look at, read this, and then tell me, what operations do we need in this class?
Increment.
Increment by 1.
Increment by 1. And what? When do we need it, صح?
When there is a push from the button.
When there is a push from the button, صح? When there is a push from the button, we need to increment. طيب. What else?
Display the current value.
Total.
Display أو basically get the current total صح؟ Get the current total. So if we come here, so some of the operations that we identify, you know, that are needed in this class is basically to increment the tally, and then to get the current total, or to display the current value, right? So from a user perspective, you know, I need these two functions. صح? I need these two. I need these two functions. Right. So note that, you know, we will show how to define the class later. Okay, we will show how to define the class later, maybe inshallah day after tomorrow. Now we are concerned with basically using the class. Okay, right now we would like to understand how do we use this class. So first, we need to construct an object of the class. In Python, you don't explicitly declare instance variables. Okay. For example, did we declare an integer variable before using it? You know, when we took, if you remember the first or the second chapter, when we talked about, did we say int, you know, or int and then variable name, and then we said, you know, x equal, and we assign it an integer, or we immediately, you know, once you say x equal and you give it an integer value, it will become an integer variable.
By default integer.
By default, it's an integer. Okay.
Doctor?
So similarly, when one first assigns a value to an instance variable, that instance variable is created. So when I say tally equal counter, it's as if I'm now creating an object of type counter. Okay, just like, you know, but of course here, you know, counter with, you know, open and close parentheses. With open and close parentheses. أيوة يا شب.
Can we declare a class?
Oh, we will. Yeah, we will see how do we declare a class. A user-defined class. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Right. So more information about constructing objects will be given later. Okay. But the idea again is, I don't really have to define, you know, the variable, you know, to be of a certain class type. All what I need to do is, you know, create an object of that type, right? And assign it to a variable. That variable will hold that class type. That variable will hold that class type. Right. Next, we invoke methods on our object. Right? We invoke methods on our object. Now, the methods that you identified is the increment, صح? And the increment is basically associated with the click, right? You know, when you click the button, when you push the button, when you click, so we can have tally.click. We can have a click method that will increment the current value. طيب, what else? Well, we can also have get value. So the get value will basically, you know, get the current value of the tally. We'll get the current value of the tally. طيب, did we identify the first method here, reset?
No.
We did not, صح? But does it make sense to have it? Especially if you want to reset, like for example, when you say tally.reset like this, you expect it will be reset to what?
Reset the click?
لا. It will reset, what do you think it will reset?
Reset the value.
It will reset the value. And you
at
think
the end of the day.
No, well, at the end of the day or at the beginning?
At the beginning, yes, at the beginning.
At the beginning, before you start clicking and counting, you want to reset, صح? you want to reset, and you will reset it to what?
0.
0. Since you are counting, you can reset it to 0. طيب, would you provide a method that will reset it to something other than 0? Maybe. Why not? Why not? Maybe you can, define an argument to the reset function or to the reset method. You can define an argument to the reset method. That will reset it to something which is meaningful to other applications. Right? So if we assume that the reset is 0, right? The reset is 0, or resets, the value to 0. And if I call click twice, what do you think here the result will return? Will be equal to?
2.
It will be equal to 2 because I clicked it twice. Huh? Because I clicked it twice. So this is how we are going to use, the classes and the objects that we have defined. Okay. This is now.
So do you say that we are creating functions so that we implement these functions on certain classes?
Yes. On the class that we are creating, and inshallah we will see that day after tomorrow.
Okay. So can we name a function .reset?
A method, you mean? Because it's associated with a class, not .reset. It is called reset. The dot is it shows that you're calling the function on the object before the dot. You cannot use the dot in the method name.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Right. So we can invoke the methods again, and the result will be different. If you call tally.click again, and you call result equal tally.getValue, it will become 3, right? It will become 3. So let us stop here before we go to instance variables. It will take us some time. We still have 3 minutes. Anybody has any question? Of course, I have kept you 1 or 2 minutes many times, but it's good to get you early. Although we don't know what's going to happen now. I don't know if you. Until now, I'm not sure what's going to happen regarding rescheduling of the classes. Inshallah, we'll see what will happen. طيب يا شباب, any question?
Doctor, when will be the next quiz?
Seems you came late, huh?
Yes.
صدقنا. إن شاء الله it will be next week بإذن الله.
يوم الاثنين صح؟
Same day, same time. We will have next week, and it will be ايش قلنا التوبكس يا شباب؟ الفانكشنز
dictionary وتيوبلز
وتيوبلز ودictionary.
Okay, thank you.
دكتور؟
نعم.
أعرف إنك جاوبت على السؤال، لكن ما في خبر عن السكجول.
ما أبي شيء قلنا لكم والله ما I don't know.
لسه تو ما مداهم.
لأن أنا خايف إنه
والله مش بس أنت اللي خايف، كلنا خايفين. إن شاء الله خير بإذن الله، إن شاء الله خير.
دكتور؟
نعم.
ممكن ترسل لنا announcement about the material of the quiz.
إن شاء الله بإذن الله. No, I have to do that.
Okay, شكرا.